There was once a man who sought the greatest treasure on earth, but little did he know, the most valuable treasure was already within him. On a peaceful day in the lush hills of Galilee, the air was filled with a soft breeze that carried the sweet fragrance of olive trees. The disciples had gathered under the shade of a massive fig tree, their robes flowing gently in the wind. Birds chirped in the distance, and the sound of a nearby stream added to the tranquility of the morning. But the disciples, though outwardly calm, felt a heavy weight in their hearts. They had been traveling with Jesus for months, witnessing his miracles and listening to his teachings, yet many of them struggled with feelings of self-doubt and worthlessness. As they sat in a circle around Jesus, they couldn't help but wonder if they were truly capable of fulfilling the mission he had set before them. Each one carried a silent burden. Peter, the leader of the group, often wrestled with his impulsiveness and feared he wasn't strong enough to lead the others. John, though known for his deep love, wondered if he could ever be as close to Jesus as he desired. Thomas, plagued with doubt, questioned whether his faith was truly enough to follow the path laid out for him. Jesus, as always, sensed the emotions stirring in their hearts. He could feel their uncertainty, their fears of inadequacy, and their quiet struggles with self-worth. His heart was moved with compassion for his beloved friends. He knew that what they needed most at that moment was not just teaching, but healing. They needed to understand the truth of their value, the treasure that lay within each of them. With a warm smile, Jesus looked around at his disciples, his gaze resting on each one of them for a moment longer than usual. He then spoke, his voice as soothing as the breeze that whispered through the trees. "Let me tell you a story," he said, his eyes filled with tenderness and wisdom. The disciples leaned in closer, sensing that this story would touch something deep within them, something they had not yet fully understood. "There was once a man named Simon," Jesus began, his voice steady and calm, drawing them into the tale. "Simon was a fisherman, much like some of you, and like many others in his village, he worked hard every day to make a living. But unlike the others, Simon carried a deep burden in his heart. No matter how much he worked or how many fish he caught, he believed he was worth nothing." The disciples exchanged glances, already feeling a connection to the man in the story. They too had felt this way at times, unworthy, inadequate, and small in comparison to the great calling Jesus had placed upon them. Every day, Jesus continued, Simon would rise before dawn, casting his nets into the sea, hoping that his hard work would somehow prove his value, not only to himself but to those around him. Yet no matter how many fish he caught, no matter how much money he earned, Simon could not escape the feeling that something was missing. Deep inside, he felt empty, as if he were searching for something that would make him truly valuable, but he didn't know what that something was. The disciples nodded, feeling the weight of Simon's inner struggle. They had often felt the same. Despite their efforts, despite being chosen by Jesus, they still carried doubts about their own worth. It was a quiet fear they had never fully voiced, but now, through Jesus' story, it was being brought to the surface. One evening, after a long and exhausting day of fishing, Simon cast his net into the sea one final time. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of gold and pink, and the sea was calm, its surface reflecting the colors of the sky like a mirror. As Simon pulled in his net, he felt something unusual, a heaviness as if the net had caught more than just fish. Jesus paused, allowing the disciples to imagine the scene. They could picture Simon standing at the edge of his boat, the fading light casting shadows on his tired face, his hands gripping the ropes as he struggled to bring the net to the surface. When Simon finally pulled the net into his boat, he found something unexpected, a small, radiant pearl. It shimmered in the fading light, its glow soft yet captivating. Simon had never seen anything like it. His heart raced with excitement, for he believed that this pearl would be the treasure he had been searching for. "This is it," he thought to himself. "This is what will prove my worth. With this pearl, I will finally be someone." The disciples were captivated by the story, their own emotions mirroring Simon's. They too had often placed their hopes in external things, achievements, recognition, possessions, hoping that these would somehow prove their worth. But like Simon, they had learned that such things were fleeting, never truly satisfying the longing in their hearts. With great anticipation, Jesus continued. Simon rushed to the marketplace the next morning, eager to show the merchants his incredible find. He imagined the crowds gathering around him, praising him for discovering such a rare treasure. He pictured himself finally being seen as valuable in the eyes of others. But when he arrived at the market, something unexpected happened. Jesus paused, his voice softening as he allowed the tension to build. The disciples could feel Simon's excitement, and they waited anxiously to hear what would happen next. As Simon approached the merchants, he proudly showed them the pearl, expecting their admiration. But one by one, the merchants examined the pearl and shook their heads. "It's pretty," they said, "but it's not worth much." Simon's heart sank. How could something so beautiful be worthless? His excitement turned to confusion and then to sorrow. He had hoped that this pearl would change everything, but instead, he felt more worthless than ever. The disciples felt Simon's crushing disappointment as if it were their own. They had all experienced moments of rejection, moments when they had placed their hopes in something only to have those hopes dashed. The weight of Simon's despair mirrored the burdens they carried in their own hearts, the fear that, despite everything, they were not enough. Simon left the marketplace, clutching the pearl tightly in his hand. Jesus said, his voice filled with empathy. He couldn't bring himself to throw it away, yet he felt ashamed for believing it would prove his worth. As he wandered through the village, his heart heavy with disappointment, he found himself standing before the door of an old wise man, known for his deep understanding of life. The disciples straightened, sensing that something profound was about to be revealed. They had come to know that in Jesus' stories, wisdom often came from unexpected places, and they felt that this wise man would offer something that Simon and they needed to hear. The wise man invited Simon inside. Jesus continued, and noticing the sorrow in his eyes, asked him, "What troubles you, my friend?" Simon, his voice trembling with emotion, showed the wise man the pearl. "I thought this would prove my worth," he said, his heart aching with disappointment. "But no one sees its value. I must be worthless just like this pearl?" At this, the disciples felt a deep pang in their hearts. They had all carried similar thoughts at one time or another, wondering if they were truly valuable in the eyes of others, or even in the eyes of God. The wise man took the pearl in his hand, examined it carefully, and then smiled gently. "Simon," he said, "this pearl is not what defines your worth. You yourself are the treasure. The value you seek is not in the things you find outside. It lies within you." The disciples were silent, their hearts moved by the wise man's words. They could feel the truth of what he was saying, and yet it was a truth they had struggled to accept. For so long, they had looked for their worth in their actions, in the approval of others, and in their roles as Jesus followers. But now, through this story, Jesus was showing them that their worth came from something much deeper, something that could not be earned or lost. In that moment, Jesus said, his voice soft and full of love, Simon realized something profound. He had spent his whole life searching for proof of his worth outside of himself, believing that something or someone else would give him value. But the wise man's words opened his eyes to a new truth. The treasure was never the pearl. The treasure had been within him all along. Tears began to fill the eyes of some of the disciples as they listened. They could see themselves in Simon. They, too, had spent years searching for validation from the world, hoping that something outside of themselves would make them feel valuable. But now, as they listened to Jesus, they realized that their worth had been within them all along, placed there by God, who loved them beyond measure. Jesus looked at each of his disciples, his gaze filled with deep compassion. He could see the weight they had been carrying, the burden of trying to prove themselves worthy, the fear of not being enough. And with a voice as gentle as the breeze that rustled the leaves around them, He spoke words that would forever change their hearts. "My beloved ones," he said softly, "you are all like Simon. The world will try to measure your value by what you achieve, by what you own, or by what others say about you. But I tell you the truth, your worth is not determined by any of those things. Your worth is inherent, given to you by the Father who created you in love." The disciples wept openly now, their tears a release of the burden they had carried for so long. They felt as though a heavy weight had been lifted from their hearts, replaced by a deep sense of peace and joy. They had spent so much of their lives trying to prove themselves, trying to earn the approval of others, trying to find something that would make them feel valuable. But now, in this moment, they understood the truth. They were already valuable simply because they were loved by God. Peter, his voice trembling with emotion, asked the question that was on all of their minds. "But, Master," he said, "what do we do when the world tells us we are not enough? How do we hold on to this truth when everything around us says otherwise?" Jesus smiled, his eyes filled with love and understanding. He stepped closer to Peter, placing a hand on his shoulder, and spoke with the gentleness of a father speaking to his beloved child. "Peter," he said, "even the smallest sparrow is seen and loved by the Father. How much more are you, his precious child, cherished? When the voices of doubt grow loud, silence them with this truth: you are loved not for what you do but for who you are. The treasure within you cannot be taken away. You are already enough because you belong to the Father." As Jesus spoke, the disciples felt a wave of peace wash over them, like a cool breeze on a hot day. They understood now. They didn't need to prove themselves to anyone. They didn't need to achieve greatness to be worthy of love. Their worth was already secure because it came from God. The treasure they had been searching for was not something they could find in the world, it was something that had been within them all along. The sun had begun to set, casting a soft golden glow over the hills. The disciples stood in silence for a moment, their hearts full of gratitude and joy. They had come to Jesus that morning with heavy hearts, burdened by doubts and fears of inadequacy. But now they felt lighter, as though the weight they had carried for so long had been lifted. They had been searching for worth in all the wrong places, but now they knew the truth. Their worth was already within them, placed there by the Father's love. As they began to walk back to their camp, Jesus watched them with a smile. He knew that the journey ahead would not always be easy. There would be challenges, trials, and moments of doubt. But he also knew that they had been given a truth that would carry them through even the darkest of times. The truth of their inherent worth and the love of the Father. "Go now," Jesus said, his voice carrying through the evening air, "and live knowing that you are the Father's greatest treasure. Let no one tell you otherwise." And with those words, the disciples walked away not just with lighter hearts, but with a deeper understanding of who they truly were, beloved children of God, cherished and valued beyond measure. And from that day on, whenever they faced moments of doubt, they would remember the story of Simon and the pearl, and they would hold on to the truth that their worth was not something they had to earn. It was a gift freely given by the Father who loved them. Moral: your worth is not defined by what you achieve, possess, or the opinions of others. It is a divine truth given by the Creator that you are inherently valuable and loved. Embrace the treasure within you, for it is priceless beyond measure. This is end of the story. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.